So, we're once again back with some Alchemy Stars, and this time around not yet with the in-depth reviews on these two new characters, because I think there's still a lot to clear up about the Sanity System itself. Initially I did want to cover it in the day one first impression video, but that was just too much, and generally these are supposed to be only about the characters, so I pretty much cut the part, and I've decided to clear up everything about the Sanity System so that everybody understands how risky it is, how much of an impact it makes in the gameplay itself, and how much it truly adds to these characters. But as usual, before we actually get into it, let me shout out my channel members real quick. Thank you guys so much for supporting me, and of course an extra huge shout out goes out to the Grand Warlock. Back to our newest system. Well, before I move on, I do have to say, because I've said the word insane so many times in the last video, to be exact once per minute, I've decided that I'm not gonna use it at all today. So that's a small challenge for me. But let's get right into it and clear up what it does, when it is in effect, and how risky it truly is. Of course, this newest mechanic is called the Sanity System. But before we get into what it does, we have to clear up when it is in effect, and I've already mentioned it in the previous video, but I'm gonna say it again. This is in effect 1. Whenever you use one of the 3 new characters, meaning the 2 gacha 6 stars or the Welfare May, and of course also 2 during the event itself. So, let's get into what it does. First off, it obviously, as you can see here, adds a brand new resource bar to your screen, which at the start of the game will show you that you have 100 sanity points, which means you are in the calm state. But that's gonna change real quick, but only if you reduce the number of these points, which will only happen through gameplay mechanics, aka the event, or by using the abilities of our 2 new favorite characters, at least when it comes to the Sanity System, Lenore and Giles, because those 2 use these points. But what happens when you use them? Well, pretty much a bunch of negative effects, but of course that's not really it. There's of course some upsides, there's some downsides, but it really depends on which of these 2 characters you're really using, or if you're using them at all. So, when you get below 100, you already leave the calm state and get some slight food poisoning, not that harsh, more like reheating an old fish stick that was already lying there for a couple of days. And also your defense in return drops by only 10%. This is pretty much not that big of a deal, 1 stack of poison is not gonna do you any harm, and 10% death drop basically makes no difference. But where it gets actually interesting is below 80, because this is pretty much the biggest upside of the system and makes the 2 gacha characters a whole lot better, because this applies the previous debuff to every single enemy at the start of every round. Which is pretty big, because considering a 10% death threat, this is something that's pretty much locked behind top tier characters like Sinza, and you're just getting it for free plus 1 stack of poison in pretty much every element, as long as you have a way to reduce these points, aka one of the 2 new gacha characters, which in return means this death threat is pretty much locked behind fire or forest for the most part. But I can see some cheesy strats in the future running like rainbow-ish teams, abusing at least this point of the Sanity System. But of course, it doesn't stay here. Because as you might know, both of these units do really want to use their skills more often than only once or twice, which means 50 isn't gonna cut it. So you are pretty much gonna go below this threshold. And unfortunately, when you get below 50, an annoying stalker appears. Randomly at the start of each round, mind you. And when you listen to what these mirages actually do, you might get scared. Because inflicting 5 stacks of bleed, dealing true damage on HP, and only being able to be neutralized by AoE damage or skills sounds pretty scary at first, but when you see them in-game, it's pretty much the difference of seeing like the shadow of a massive beast, which then turns out it's only a dog. And yeah, that's pretty much the same situation here, because in actual gameplay mirages aren't that scary, because they die instantly, their true damage is pretty pretty pitiful, at least if you only have one of them. But when you don't get rid of them, yes, they do get pretty annoying, because when you suddenly have like 5 of them, their 5k plus true damage every turn plus bleed is pretty annoying. But these are actually a massive upside for Giles, because most of Giles' equipment is pretty much about just getting rid of these mirages. He gets bonus damage, and because these just instantly die in one hit, it's really easy to not only get the damage buff, but also reset your active skill, so you can instantly also profit from the double damage of his active skill on reset. But for this event, you should probably at least have access to at least one AoE skill damage skill, or a wide ranging 2 cluster chain, something like that, and you're pretty much gonna be fine. But where it definitely gets way more annoying is at below 20, because at below 20 you're gonna be permanently at 5 poisoned stacks, and your healing is also reduced to only 20%. And reduced to 20 sounds pretty bad, but you still heal a decent amount, but 5 stacks of poison can be pretty annoying. If you combine that with multiple mirages throwing true damage and bleed at you, you are definitely not gonna stay that calm for much longer, because we're not talking about a slight case of food poisoning here. You ate something really bad here. But is that still enough to turn this sanity system into that much of a hassle to deal with? Not really. I think this is pretty much still fine. If you're thinking of going permanently below 20, you should probably really think about just using a healer. Or it might get a bit troublesome to deal with all of these passive effects, and then also the attacks of your enemies, which are going to hit even harder when you enter the not so calm state, which reduces your team dev to only 10%. And while only having 10% damage sounds, yeah, I definitely didn't want to say the word, but it sounds horrible. But it doesn't necessarily mean that you're just gonna take 90% more damage, because that's not really how the math in this game works. So while you definitely take a whole lot more damage, it's not that bad. And considering that both of these units are not really close combat type oriented, with Giles being a literal sniper and Lenore having massive range at 0, you just have to not run into every single enemy, aka not suffering from massive skill issues, and you're pretty much gonna be fine. Right? But what if you still want to use the skills of Lenore or Giles beyond 0? Well, when you even go below 0 sanity, you're just gonna have to sacrifice some of your HP, which now means your skills are gonna be pretty costly. And that was pretty much everything about the system. In general, the system is not that bad. Sure, it sounds horrible on paper, especially all of these debuffs, 5 stacks of poison, 20% healing only, 10% defense only, but in actual gameplay you don't really feel that. And this one single upside of having 10% dash shred and a single stack of poison every single turn on your enemies is so much more valuable than actually suffering from all of these debuffs. Which means in general the sanity system is more of an upside. For Giles it's pretty much a really nice add-on, but his single target damage is just so insane. But I'm gonna talk about that in probably the next video, which should be his review. So stay tuned for that. That was all from me for today. Have a nice day and see you next time.